I'm joined now by Paul Bickley, a church leader and media commentator. And we're talking today, Paul, about Ukraine and Russia and the fighting that's still going on there and the attempts to draw up a peace plan that's acceptable to both sides. The latest we've heard is that Ukraine's own diplomats are working on an alternative peace plan to put forward to the US and hopefully thereafter to Russia as well. With all the travelling around that's been done by diplomats in recent weeks and all the discussions about whether or not this or that part of the White House-sponsored peace plan will prove acceptable to either side, does this just highlight how important diplomacy is, even when countries are actively at war?
Diplomacy is essential in this moment. There is a kind of question over what kind of diplomacy we talk about. And who are the people with agency. What we have in terms of context here is, of course, as you said, a White House-sponsored 28-point plan, which, according to some sources, was effectively a kind of a Russian-authored proposal, which contained many kind of provisions that the Ukrainian government simply could not agree with. And that included significant loss of territory, but also the real battle here is not over territory, but over sovereignty and over Russia's control of their kind of immediate orbit and a fight over what direction that part of the world kind of goes in. Does it lean west to Europe, or does it lean east to Moscow and to Russia? So that's what's really at stake. Really, on the one hand, diplomacy is the only way out of this brutal war, which is claiming thousands of lives, including the lives of civilians on both sides. So yes, it's essential, but at the minute, what you have is a sort of a very problematic process. The US pushing for a deal. They are disinterested in Ukraine's cause. They simply want to, as it were, get a deal over the line, even if that deal is a very fragile deal, which would weaken Ukraine's sovereignty, weaken Ukraine's position, and would probably have Russia coming back for more in a few years' time. One of the provisions of the original 28-point plan was a reduction in the size of Ukraine's armed forces. So you can see where that's going. So there is a question about what kind of diplomacy. Of course, Ukraine and also European leaders who are sort of shut out of this process are both having to project their willingness to be part of a diplomatic process. And hence, Ukraine's spokespeople would say, we do think that the US's proposal can be the foundation of a peace. But that word is very, very important. I think it's a way of saying there are some things here we could agree with. There's much that we can't. We do want to build a peace, but we can't do it on these terms. And of course, it is in Ukraine's interest. Ukraine, as a society, militarily to some degree, although Russia aren't making much progress, it's not going to get easier for Ukraine as time goes on. So I suspect they do want to bring some kind of. They are prepared to negotiate and do want to bring a conclusion to the conflict as it's being fought, but they will be mindful of the long term, where it seems to me that the US are pretty much just invested in getting the deal over the line. So we have this kind of paradox. Diplomacy is the only thing that's going to finish this well, but there is a question about what kind of diplomacy we're prepared to do.
Yeah, and of course, Russia itself had said of this peace plan when it was originally leaked to people that it could be the basis for talks about peace, but wasn't a solution in and of itself. And America, of course, the main military and financial backer of Ukraine's fight against Russia in the years that this war has lasted. Talking about peace, and obviously as Christians, I'm sure we're all praying for peace in any situation where there are countries fighting each other. How important is it to get lasting peace in a situation like this?
Well, I think it's very important. Do you remember the words that Jeremiah the prophet speaks against the false prophets, which is you preach peace, you say peace, peace when there is no peace. We need to be really careful that for the sake of there are lots of interests here, lots of vested interests, and we are not we as it were, the kind of Europe and the UK are not pure as driven snow in this. We want to see Ukraine continue to fight the war. We don't want to be in a position of having to take up arms if Russia come for some of the Baltic states. So we continue to want Ukraine to give Russia a bloody nose, and hope that the peace will last and will kind of create a settled state in that part of the world, where Russia are not really trying to kind of extend their influence or borders. But there is a component of this which is not just realpolitik. Of course, it's justice. It's what you prepared. What is acceptable in the end? Because some claims in the name of justice are people going to have to, as it were, let go of. It is not a particularly just scenario that substantial parts of Ukraine will be given to Russia because it has aggressed, and because through the use of lives and attacks against Ukraine's sovereignty, its people, and to considerable loss of life of the Russian military forces, they will have won a considerable amount of territory and a considerable amount of influence, and they already did this, of course, with Crimea, and the world didn't really resist at that point. But a peace has to have some element of justice, and for it to be lasting as well. I think that would be important. If too much of an unjust peace will just store up resent, and conflicts will emerge. They may not necessarily be national and geopolitical as the conflict is at the moment. They may just be local, but those conflicts in some ways can be the worst, as we know with our experience in Northern Ireland. So there is a real need, as it were, to commit to the programme and to commit to the sort of awkward realpolitik of negotiating a peace, but also keep a hold on the sense of what is just in this moment. That I'm not saying that's easy, but I think it's quite important that, as it were, in theory, we are prepared to do that.
Well, while politicians and diplomats are trying to carry out their work and find practical solutions, political solutions, how important is it that Christians are praying into all this?
I just think it's essential. I find myself, even over the last 24 hours with the news, of course, Volodymyr Zelensky was in London meeting with our Prime Minister, Frederick Merz, and Emmanuel Macron. We don't really know what is happening in those rooms. Of course, we get the briefings. But I have a sense of a continent that is very fragile. You may have heard, I don't know if you heard, that within the last few weeks, both France and Germany have reinstituted forms of national service. We can read the runes there. I think that's not just about preparing militarily, it's about communicating a message to domestic populations that they may, in the near future, have to deal with crisis and privation in the name of war. So I think what I want to do in those scenarios, and if I'm reading those runes rightly, but perhaps I'm not, but if I am, I don't want to fret about that and become anxious about that. I want to, as it were, turn that into kind of prayerfulness and attentiveness and listening to what the Spirit is saying to us. We are not, as Christians, I think we have a view, our sense of ourselves should transcend beyond the success or failure of particular states or particular civilizations even. But at the same time, we want to see the flourishing of people around us. We don't want to see conflict. We want to see peace. We want to see prosperity, and we want to be people of peace. So I think it's just essential that certainly if the choice is between panic and prayer, we need to choose prayer.
Just finally, then, Paul, you've alluded to the absolute horrors of war and some of the things that go on when armies collide are just absolutely atrocious. How can we as Christians believe and talk about a loving God when we see humanity's inhumanity on that scale?
Well, I think in a way, our faith is the only is the only explanation for that. I think some other accounts of what human nature is, the sort of inherent goodness and endless opportunity for progress and civilizational advancement. It wasn't that long ago since political scientists were talking about the end of history after the end of the Cold War, and that we had kind of reached a kind of apogee, a kind of settlement of liberal democratic capitalism, and the world was entering into a new period of peace. Of course, what Ukraine and the Russia conflict is the kind of backwash of the settlement that came about at the moment of the end of the Cold War, and Russia feeling like it has lost position, it has lost territory, it has lost influence, and is now trying to reassert and regain it. So I certainly think that the Christian witness to what the human being is. And you have to really go to people like Augustine, who speaks about our disordered loves, and the disordered nature of our desires, our desire for power, our desire for dominance. These are the things that are driving those conflicts. It's human sin. So for me, at least, I would say that my Christian faith helps me understand what's happening in the world. I don't find, while I find it dismaying, perhaps it's not. It's like we should accept that these things are possible and likely, and that the way of Jesus is a way of peace against violence, precisely because the world is a world which often indulges in violence. That is why Jesus comes as a king of peace, and as the old theologian says, reigns from the cross. It's a really important moment to be thinking about what that means. That the kingdom that we believe in does not come through a means of military victory or violence, particularly as kind of Christian narratives are being sought for to kind of buttress political claims of different kinds. I mean, I know we don't have time to get into that, but we need to remember that the kingdom of God is a kingdom of peace and a kingdom that comes through service and sacrifice, and not through violence.
Paul Bickley, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Dave.